Alright, you got your turbo picked out, your engine's getting ready. Now you gotta figure out how to fuel the dang thing. Alright guys, back again. This time we're gonna talk about fuel injectors, which seems like such an easy topic, you know? You just go, oh, I'm making some horsepower, I need bigger injectors than stock. Those look bigger, I'll buy them. But there's a little bit more to it, so I figured I'd break down some of the things you should think about when you're buying your fuel injectors. Alright, thing number one. Everybody seems to think that bigger is better. But that's absolutely crazy, because if you're going to street drive this car and you pick a gigantic, sloppy old injector, you are going to be dumping fuel that you do not need to waste all the time. Gas mileage would be horrible, to be a mess. On the other hand, if you don't go big enough, you get on the dyno and you're tuning, boost goes up, and then what do you know? You're out of fuel, you're kind of done for the day. You might not have hit the goal you were shooting for because you're limited on fuel. So, how big's too big? Well, they make these cool things online. You can search them out. They're like fuel injector calculators, and you can type in the horsepower you're shooting for, you know, the number of cylinders of the car, and then how many cc's and your base fuel pressure, and it'll give you a calculation to try to determine, you know, it'll say you put 550 cc in there, and it'll say, okay, yeah, that's good for 270 horsepower on this application. Anyway, it gives you like a chart and kind of a reference to go off of. So that's what I recommend for picking your size. You know, give yourself a little wiggle room, you know, just in case the car makes a little bit more than you think it was going to. But don't stress it too much. Just get something that's, you know, right around the area you need to be. The other thing you need to figure out is, you know, like how important is your gas mileage? Like if you're gonna daily drive this car and you know, you don't want to like waste a ton of gas. The gas is, you know, it adds up. You gotta drive every day. If it's your daily driver and it's turboed and you need to save some fuel, then you need to buy a better injector. So by better, does that mean brand? I mean, what does better mean? Well, on some of these old injectors, they just ran kind of sloppy. The bodies inside of them move really, really slow. So at low speeds, low idle, stick with me, this is complicated sort of, the computer sends an electrical pulse to the ECU to fire it. We all know that, right? Well, if that pulse is very, very short, the body inside here doesn't have enough time to respond. So you're like, give it a pulse, and it has to open and close in that time. So under a certain millivolt, like, you know, under like 1 millivolt, it depends on the injector entirely, but under a certain duty cycle or millivolt in the tune, this body, you send the pulse and it's so short that the injector kind of maybe like stutters but doesn't actually open, which causes like a horrible misfire. So what you have to do to band-aid that is add more duty cycle or tell it to give more fuel to keep the pulse long enough till it actually has time to fire it and close it in the amount of time that you've allotted. The bad thing about that is that might bring your air-fuel ratio like way down into a point where you're just really like wasting a lot more fuel. The car could idle much leaner with a faster bodied injector. As you get into the newer injectors and the newer cars, you notice a lot of them are plastic body, they're very lightweight. I mean, this is a heavy sucker compared to this thing. They made the bodies inside here move faster, so you can actually command these at a faster pulse, and they're not gonna like cause that same problem as these had where it won't open. Which is why you can run, you know, a lot of times, you know, back in the day you'd have to run really, really rich to do even 1,000 cc on the street, but nowadays you can do 1,000 cc no problem because they move fast enough that you can hit your target idle and still be really smooth without that either misfire from it not opening or super rich. So that's some stuff you might want to think about. Let's see, what else do I got? Oh yeah, fuel types and compliance. If you're gonna do, you know, ethanol or ethanol type fuels, you might want to make sure your fuel injector is, you know, capable of doing that. I think almost everything will do ethanol. The only issue I've seen with that, I'm only bringing up ethanol because it seems to be the common street car thing. If you leave your injector sitting with ethanol in it too long, ethanol has some kind of property like hydra something, I don't know, some fancy word that basically means it tends to attract water out of the air or out of its surroundings. So if it pulls water into the actual injector around the fuel, it can actually rust the inside of the body just a little bit, and that's enough to make it stop moving and stick shut, or slow it down to where your flow rate changes, and then you've got bigger issues. So keep that in mind. The only other really fuel situation that I've seen is something called Mtbe, which it's in the higher grade like race applications, but maybe a lot of you are doing pump gas, race gas instead of ethanol. If you're using something like Q16, or there's a few other ones that run it, but that particular chemical in race fuel will actually cause the inside of the injector to swell, and if it's not designed for it, it'll start to change the flow rate, and it's not consistent. So it's not like you put it in, they all swell, and the injector just gets a little bit smaller, no big deal, you keep tuning it. From my experience, it seems like you put it in, it swells, and they're all over the place. You got some almost misfiring and some really rich. It doesn't work at all. Okay. Oh, here's the other thing to consider. If you're trying to target, say, 300 horsepower, and you put into your calculator, say, a 550cc injector, and it's like right on the verge. Like I actually plugged this into a calculator earlier today. We ran a 550cc injector at 43 psi, and it was saying on a 4-cylinder, 265 horsepower at the wheels or something like that. And if you do a 550cc at 63 psi, that can make 321 horsepower. So keep in mind that as long as you have a good enough pump in the tank, your fuel pressure should rise with boost if you're doing a boosted application. If not, this isn't nearly as critical. But keep in mind that if the injector that you want to pick out, say you want something that's going to run good and be a good reliable injector, you don't want 1000cc, maybe you just want a 500cc, plus the cost is less, cost is good too. Go ahead and do that and bump the base pressure up on your adjustable pressure regulator if you can. Sometimes 10 psi is enough, sometimes you need 15 or 20 psi, and that's totally okay, because most of the time the fuel injector itself running at 43 psi, if you think about it, most street cars make between 10 and 20 pounds of boost. So if you're going to rise 20 pounds of boost, then you just need to make sure that your fuel pressure can rise from, say, the base pressure of like 40 to 60, right? So if you're going to raise the base pressure to 60, then you need to make sure that your pump is capable of making a little over 80 psi so that it continues to rise through the rise band, through the rev band. Anyway, is there anything else I need to cover? Oh, make sure that whatever you're doing, like if your management system that you've purchased is capable of adjusting the battery offset voltages. When you set a new set of injectors into a car, the one thing that makes them run like really good or really bad a lot of times is telling it the correct voltage to run at. This will also make a difference, like if your battery voltage is lower or higher, it'll run the injector at the same level. This is a really easy way to blow the car up on accident and not even know why. Like, if your alternator is starting to go and it's not putting out the right amount of voltage, then at that point, the computer can compensate by giving it, more duty cycle. And so there's a chart in the ECU that will do that in most cases if you're running on a standalone. Even a lot of factory applications can do it as well, but it just needs to be adjusted. It's also called dead times, latency. I don't know what else they call it in different ECUs, but that's the only thing I had on my mind other than that. Pump, injector, I think I covered it all. Sometimes it's hard to adapt these injectors into a different application, so when you're purchasing them, make sure you can get they make like a bigger style one and a smaller style one. Make sure you get the right size for your application. I don't know how many times I've seen people come in with new fuel rails or new regulators, and they either got leaks on the upper O-ring, which is really dangerous, fuel leaks are dangerous, or in the bottom, it's just not sealing the air into the manifold, and that causes all kinds of ridiculous issues like, idle surge and boost leak. You don't want any of that kind of stuff. So I think that's about it. Make sure you got an injector that's about the right size. Make sure that the fuel is compatible with the injector that you picked out. Make sure that your fuel pump and your fuel pressure regulator can rise 1 psi for every pound of boost at least, depending on the application, but make sure your pump will keep up with your raising fuel pressure. If you're gonna bump it, consult the internet for that chart and figure out, exactly how much, fuel injector you're gonna need for your application. Use it, it's out there, it's what it's for. That's about it. Anyway, all right, I guess that'll be good for today. See you guys next time.